The pristine white envelope lay on my desk like a ghost from a life I'd already lived and died in. My fingers, steady as a surgeon's after years of disciplined rebirth, trembled for a fraction of a second as I traced the elegant cursive of Marcus's handwriting to Ilana on her 28th birthday. The irony was a physical thing, a bitter pill I'd been forced to swallow once before. 3 years ago, to the day, this same birthday, this same invitation, had been the overture to my public execution. That was the night they had branded me a thief, a disgrace, and with practiced sorrow cast me out of the Chen family forever. From my secretary's corner, the delicate scent of jasmine tea wafted through my gubernatorial office, a scent I now associated with quiet power and solitude. It mixed with the metallic taste of anticipated revenge that coated my tongue, a flavor I had cultivated for 1,095 days. I had been reborn, not into the blissful ignorance of a new soul, but with the perfect searing memories of my previous life's betrayals. And here they were, my beloved family, my devoted fiancé, my dearest friends, foolishly, arrogantly repeating history. The invitation was for a lavish dinner at the Pinnacle, the same restaurant where they had sprung their first trap. The memory was sharp enough to draw blood. The sudden appearance of police, the feigned shock on my father's face, the crocodile tears streaming down my sister Lily's cheeks as she pointed a trembling finger at me. Embezzlement, they'd called it, a betrayal of the family business. I had been too stunned, too full of love and trust to fight back. I had walked into my own slaughter like a lamb. This time, the lamb had returned as a lioness, draped in the authority of the state. My election as governor had sent shockwaves through their gilded world, an event they could neither comprehend nor control. They had assumed I was dead, a tragic footnote in their family history, perished in the obscurity of exile. My return was not just an inconvenience, it was an existential threat. I picked up the envelope. The cardstock was thick, expensive, a testament to the wealth they had stolen from me. They believed my new position was a fluke, a temporary anomaly they could correct with the same tactics they had used before. They saw the governor, but they didn't see Elena. They didn't see the woman who had spent 3 years in a cold, unforgiving world, meticulously planning her return, not just to power, but to justice. Would they really be so bold as to try the same scheme twice? The thought sent a cold thrill through me. Oh, I hoped so. Their lack of imagination would be their downfall. The click-clack of designer heels on the marble floors of the governor's mansion preceded her arrival, a frantic staccato rhythm like a countdown timer to a bomb's detonation. 20 minutes after I'd processed the invitation, my sister Lily burst through my office doors, her performance already in full swing. Her large doe eyes, weapons of mass manipulation she had perfected since childhood, brimmed with exquisitely timed tears. She clutched a newspaper clipping in her hand, the ink staining her perfectly manicured fingers. "Elena, you have to help me," she sobbed, her voice cracking with the same practiced despair it had 3 years ago. Back then, she had clutched a falsified portfolio, begging me to invest my personal trust fund into her fledgling startup. That same startup, I later learned, was a hollow shell corporation designed for the sole purpose of framing me for embezzlement. The familiar ache of betrayal, a phantom limb of my past life, twisted in my chest. But this time, it was accompanied by the cold, clear satisfaction of foreknowledge. I watched her, a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. Every gesture, every hitch in her breath, was a carbon copy of the past. She hadn't evolved, she hadn't grown, she was still playing the same tired role. The newspaper she thrust at me featured an unflattering photo of her at a nightclub, with a headline questioning her company's sudden financial troubles. "They're trying to ruin me," she cried, collapsing into the chair opposite my desk. "These reporters, they're digging into my business, making up lies. You're the governor now, Elena. You have connections. You can make them stop." I leaned back, steepling my fingers, my face a mask of neutral concern I had spent years perfecting. In my past life, I would have wrapped my arms around her, sworn to protect her, and immediately called my contacts to kill the story. I would have walked willingly into the web. This time, I simply listened. I let the poison of her words fill the air between us, a toxic perfume of deceit. She was testing the waters, seeing if the old, foolish Elena was still in there somewhere. Did she truly believe I'd forgotten how she'd sold me out for 30 pieces of silver? She saw my powerful office, my title, and assumed my memory was as weak as my former will. The restaurant reeked of expensive cologne and quiet desperation. The pinnacle hadn't changed. Its dim lighting still cast long, ominous shadows that reminded me of prison bars. Marcus sat opposite me, his handsome face etched with a look of profound worry. He reached across the white tablecloth, his fingers brushing mine. The touch that had once sent electric pulses through my body now felt like the scrape of a reptile's scale. "Elena, I've been worried about you," he murmured, his deep green eyes, the color of envy and greed, filled with what any other woman would mistake for love. The same words, the exact same inflection. In my past life, this dinner, this exact conversation, had been the final nail in my coffin. He had lulled me into a false sense of security, coaxing out my fears about the family business, only to twist my words into a confession for the police testimony that sent me to prison. The irony burned like acid in my throat. He wasn't worried about my well-being. He was terrified of my newfound power. My governorship had complicated his life. His engagement to Lily, his carefully constructed future built upon the ruins of mine. "Worried how, Marcus?" I asked, my voice soft, inviting the lie. "This new role." "It's a lot of pressure," he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "You've been through so much. I just want to make sure you're okay. That you haven't forgotten who your real friends are. His real friends. The ones who had toasted my destruction with champagne after I was dragged away in handcuffs. The ones who had carved up my assets like vultures." I could almost hear the unspoken threat beneath his velvet words. "We put you down once, we can do it again." He spoke of the past with a gentle, regretful air, painting the picture of a tragic misunderstanding, a family crisis where he was a helpless bystander. He was weaving a tapestry of lies, each thread designed to ensnare me again. He was probing for weakness, for a hint of the naive girl who had loved him so blindly. How many lies could one man weave in a single evening? I intended to let him spin his web completely, right up until the moment I set it ablaze. The Chen family mansion's grand foyer was as cold and imposing as I remembered. It was a museum of a family, not a home. Mother stood at the base of the sweeping staircase, her posture ramrod straight, the matriarch defending her tainted legacy. The scent of her signature roses, cloying and funereal, filled the air, a scent I now associated with her beautiful, thorny duplicity. "Elena!" her voice echoed, each word dripping with a false maternal concern that made my skin crawl. "We need to talk." Father stood a step behind her, a silent marble statue of complicity. His silence had always been his most damaging weapon. It was the silence of assent, of cowardice. They had orchestrated this scene before, the loving family cornering their wayward daughter for an intervention, all for her own good. Last time, overwhelmed by their united front, I had capitulated. I had cried. I had begged for their forgiveness. This time I smiled. "We're worried about you," Mother continued, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of weakness. "This governorship, it's unseemly. A Chen does not grovel for votes. It has brought shame upon our name. The media is circling, digging up the past." My past, she meant. The past they had fabricated for me. "We have decided," she said, her voice dropping to a tone of grave finality, "that for the good of the family, you must resign. Step down quietly. We can say it's for health reasons. Either you resign from your position and return the family name to dignity, or we'll have no choice but to take drastic measures." The ultimatum hung in the air, as heavy and stagnant as the atmosphere in the room. The same threat, the same choice. Fall in line or be destroyed. They were offering me a gilded cage, a chance to return to the fold as a neutered, compliant daughter. They couldn't conceive of a world where I held power they hadn't granted me. What drastic measures could they possibly threaten that would surpass exile and imprisonment. They had no idea that I had already survived their worst. Their threats were hollow echoes of a past I had already conquered. My smile widened slightly. I slipped my hand into the pocket of my tailored blazer, my fingers closing around the cool, smooth surface of a state-of-the-art recording device. It was no bigger than a cufflink, its microphone sensitive enough to capture every whispered conspiracy in the cavernous foyer. The slight weight of it was a comfort, a tangible reminder of the evidence I had never thought to gather in my previous life. Trust had been my blindness, my fatal flaw. This time, my vision was crystal clear. Drastic measures? I repeated, my voice imbued with a carefully calibrated note of fear. What do you mean? Let them talk. Let them lay out their entire plan. Let them threaten and cajole and reveal the depths of their corruption. Tonight's family dinner, which would inevitably follow this little intervention, would proceed exactly as they had planned. They believed they were the directors of this drama. They didn't realize the lead actress had rewritten the entire script. The magnificent crystal chandelier above us cast fractured light across the polished floor, each shard of light reflecting a different angle of the revenge I had spent 3 excruciating years crafting. They saw me as a problem to be solved. They didn't see the trap closing in around them, a trap built from their own greed and arrogance. I was ready. I was waiting. Would they recognize the trap before they'd already stepped into it? Judging by the smug certainty on their faces, the answer was a resounding no. We sat in our childhood cafe, a place that once smelled of cinnamon rolls and innocent secrets. Now, the cloying sweetness only served to highlight the poison dripping from my sister's words. Lily's perfectly manicured fingers drummed an agitated rhythm against her porcelain coffee cup, the same nervous tick that had betrayed her lies since we were children fighting over a stolen doll. "It's a political vendetta, that's all it is," she said, leaning forward conspiratorially, her voice a low hiss. She had summoned me here under the pretense of a sisterly heart-to-heart, away from the stifling formality of my office. Her real goal was to probe and slander. "My rivals know I'm your sister. They're attacking my company to get to you. It's so unfair that my success is being used against you." She painted herself as the tragic victim, a pawn in a larger political game, all while subtly planting the narrative that I was the true source of her problems. In this timeline, her audacity had grown. Perhaps she believed my supposed death and exile had been a permanent silencing. Her lips curved into a smile that never reached her eyes, a chillingly vacant expression. Honestly, Elena, people are talking. They're saying the only way someone with your history could become governor is through some kind of backroom deal. That you must be corrupt. There it was, the first volley in their new character assassination campaign. She wasn't just defending herself. She was actively seeding the narrative that would be their next line of attack. I took a slow sip of my tea, letting her words hang in the air. The tiny microphone sewn into the lapel of my coat captured every syllable. In my past life, her words would have been daggers to my heart. Now they were simply data points, evidence logs in a prosecution I was building brick by brick. How long before she realized I'd been recording every confession? She was so consumed by her own performance, she couldn't see the audience was taking notes for the trial. The study where Father received me was a mausoleum of his own ego. It smelled of old leather, expensive scotch, and a profound, lingering disappointment that seemed to have soaked into the mahogany walls. This was the same room where he had disowned me 3 years prior, his words as cold and sharp as the letter opener on his desk. His steel-gray eyes, devoid of any paternal warmth, watched me as I entered. He did not rise. He gestured to the chair opposite him, a king granting an audience to a troublesome subject. A single sheet of paper lay on the gleaming desk between us. "Sign this," he said, his voice flat, without preamble. He slid the contract across the desk. It was a pre-written resignation letter citing personal and health reasons for my immediate departure from the governor's office. "Sign this resignation, Elena, and we'll consider your debt to the family paid," he stated. The words were identical, a perfect echo of our last conversation before my exile, when he had demanded I sign a confession to save the family's reputation. His confidence, however, had a brittle edge now. He was a man accustomed to absolute power within his domain, and my independent success was a concept his mind could not process. My debt? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. What debt do I owe a family that threw me to the wolves? A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He was not used to being questioned. Do not be naive. You carry our name. Your actions reflect on us. This political stunt is a stain. End it now, and we can begin the process of rehabilitation. We can find you a quiet, respectable position somewhere, out of the public eye. He was offering to buy my life back for me, to control my narrative, to reduce me once again to a manageable asset. He saw me not as a daughter, but as a rogue stock that was destabilizing his portfolio. He genuinely believed he was being generous. Did he remember signing my death warrant, or had he convinced himself it was mercy? In his cold, calculating mind, casting me out had been a necessary business decision, and this was simply another transaction. Marcus's penthouse apartment was a glass cage overlooking the city, a predator's perch. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected his handsome face back at me in a dozen fractured images, a visual metaphor for his splintered soul. He poured 2 glasses of a deep burgundy wine, the same vintage that had loosened my tongue 3 years ago, leading to the tearful, private confessions he had secretly recorded and weaponized against me. His charm, once so intoxicating, felt like sandpaper against my skin now. Every compliment on my dress, every admiring glance, was a dagger disguised as a caress. He spoke of a future together, a ridiculous, desperate fantasy. Lily and I... It was a mistake, Elena, a business arrangement, that's all. It was always you. We can put this all behind us. Marry me. We can be a true power couple. Together, we can control this whole city. He leaned in, his breath tasting of mint and manipulation, and kissed me. I did not pull away. I allowed the kiss, my body rigid, my mind cold and detached. I knew with absolute certainty that his apartment was wired. Surveillance cameras, discreetly placed, would be recording this intimate moment. In his arrogance, he believed he was creating blackmail material, a weapon to deploy if I refused to play along. He would leak the video, claiming the governor was having an illicit affair with her sister's fiancé. It was a classic, sordid play. But 2 could play the game of digital ghosts. The moment he'd given me the address, my own security team had done a sweep. Not only did I know the location of every camera and microphone, but I had also taken the liberty of hacking his entire digital life. His cloud storage, his emails, his encrypted messaging apps, I owned them all. He was recording a single staged kiss. I possessed a decade of his corruption. Would he be surprised to discover I'd already hacked his entire digital life? His web of lies was about to become his own digital prison. Mother's prize-winning roses were her pride and joy. She tended them with the same ruthless, meticulous care she had used to cultivate my siblings' hatred toward me. Each snip of her silver shears was deliberate, merciless, pruning away any imperfection. The morning sun caught the dew on the blood-red petals, creating an illusion of perfect beauty that masked the vicious thorns beneath. I found her there, in her garden, a sanctuary of her own making. She didn't look at me, focusing on a rose bush as if it were the most important thing in the world. A family's reputation is like a garden, Elena, she began, her voice honey-sweet with practice. It takes generations to cultivate. One errant weed, left unchecked, can choke the life out of everything. The implication was clear. I was the weed. Your father is a practical man. He sees solutions. I see the heart of the matter, your political career. It is a stain on our legacy. People whisper. They remember the scandal. It is common. She snipped a perfect rose from its stem and held it out to me. Be a good daughter. Think of the family. Think of the name your ancestors built. The same woman who had taught me to be strong, to reach for the stars, had systematically sawed off every branch I'd grown on my own. She had poisoned the soil of my childhood, turning my siblings against me, all to maintain her pristine, manicured vision of the Chen family. She loved the idea of family more than the people in it. Her love was conditional, transactional, and ultimately hollow. How many roses had she planted over the graves of my dreams? I looked at her, standing amidst her perfect blood-red flowers, and felt nothing but an icy calm. The time for wilting was over. The university library, with its hushed reverence and the dusty, comforting scent of aged paper, had once been our sanctuary. David, my best friend since we were awkward freshmen, sat across from me at our old secluded table between the history stacks. The shelves around us were filled with books that held more integrity than the man before me. His laughter was too loud, too frequent, echoing unnaturally in the quiet space as he casually asked about my work. So, being governor must be intense. I saw you were photographed with Senator Morrison. Big player. What's he like in person? His questions were probes, disguised as friendly curiosity, searching for any scrap of information, any hint of gossip he could use. In our past life, David had been my confidant. I had wept on his shoulder after my exile. He had listened with a sympathetic ear to all my plans, all my fears. And then, he had sold every secret, every vulnerability to Marcus and my family for a lucrative position in their media company. He was their spy, their loyal dog. His smartphone lay on the table between us, face up like a loaded weapon. A tiny red icon, almost invisible to the naked eye, pulsed in the corner of the screen. He was recording our conversation. He was still on their payroll. It's good to see you, El, he said, his smile looking strained. I've missed my best friend. The musty scent of the old books reminded me of all the secrets we had shared in this very spot, secrets he had monetized. The betrayal of a lover or a family member was a sharp, clean wound. The betrayal of a best friend, the keeper of your soul, was a slow-acting poison that rotted you from the inside out. In my past life, it had nearly destroyed me. In this life, it was just one more crime to add to the indictment. When had my closest friend become my most dangerous enemy? The moment he decided my friendship was worth less than their money. And I had the recording of his betrayal to prove it. The forged documents landed on my desk with a soft thud, a curse made manifest. My chief of staff, a man I had vetted with extreme prejudice, slid the file toward me, his face grim. Governor, this came through a confidential channel from the state comptroller's office. It's problematic. I opened the folder, inside a series of bank transfers and authorization forms, each a masterpiece of deception that would make Da Vinci weep. My digital signature perfectly replicated. The documents detailed the diversion of $5 million from the governor's discretionary fund into a newly formed shell company, Helena Enterprises. A clumsy, almost insulting variation of my name. It was Lily's playbook, a direct copy of the scheme she'd used to destroy my tech startup in our previous timeline. The familiar sting of injustice, sharp and hot, burned in my chest. But this time, a cool wave of anticipation tempered the pain. I looked up at my chief of staff, allowing my eyes to widen. I let my jaw go slack. I summoned the ghost of the girl I used to be, the girl who would have been shattered by this. My face crumpled with the perfect expression of shock and hurt. I was playing the victim they all expected me to be. I don't understand, I stammered, my voice trembling. This is impossible. My family believed they were creative. In reality, they were lazy, arrogant, and utterly predictable. They were reusing the same weapon, never imagining I had spent 3 years studying its design and building a shield. Would they ever learn that their greatest strength, their utter lack of conscience, had become their most fatal weakness? They were about to. The emergency board meeting was a shark tank, and I was the bleeding seal. The mahogany conference table reflected the predatory, satisfied smirks of my political rivals, men who had been put in place by my father's network. Each face was a mask of false concern, hiding a hungry anticipation for my fall. The air was thick with a nauseating cocktail of expensive aftershave and the cheaper, sharper perfume of corruption. I stood at the head of the table, my posture deliberately slumped. I lowered my eyes, refusing to meet their gloating gazes. My voice, when I spoke, quavered with just the right amount of emotional distress. In light of these serious and disturbing allegations, I began, my voice barely a whisper, I believe the only appropriate course of action is to request a voluntary leave of absence, effective immediately, pending a full and transparent investigation. A collective, silent gasp of victory filled the room. It was more than they had hoped for. I was not just stepping aside, I was surrendering. My trembling hands, a touch of choreographic genius, if I did say so myself, folded the documents in front of me. Documents that they believed were my concession speech, but which actually contained the preliminary findings of an investigation I had initiated weeks ago. I looked broken, defeated. A governor brought down by a rookie-level financial scandal, they tasted victory, sweet and absolute, on their tongues. Did they taste victory, or were they already choking on their own poison? They were too busy celebrating to notice the noose tightening around their necks. While they castored, they popped champagne corks in backroom offices and leaked sanctimonious quotes to the press about the need for integrity in government, I was at work. Not in the governor's mansion, which was now a crime scene of their own making, but in a secure, anonymous office in a downtown high-rise, my private command center. The only light came from the harsh, fluorescent bars overhead and the glow of 6 monitors, each displaying a different stream of data. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a dance of code and numbers I had perfected in my exile. While they were planting a fake trail, I was following the real one. They had used my family's own labyrinthine network of offshore banks and shell corporations to funnel the $5 million, believing it was an untraceable web. The irony was so rich, it was almost sickening. They never imagined that their discarded daughter had retained the access codes, the backdoors, the digital keys to every single account. I had been a silent, invisible administrator in their kingdom of theft for years. The money trail they thought was a confusing maze was, to me, a brightly lit highway. I watched in real time as the stolen funds were rerouted from Helena Enterprises and split, like a river delta, into smaller streams. $1 million to a holding company owned by Lily. Another $1 million into a development project Marcus was championing. $500,000 paid as a consulting fee to David's media firm. And the largest portion, $2.5 million, deposited neatly into a trust controlled by my father. They weren't just framing me, they were paying themselves for the privilege with state funds. How thoroughly would they hang themselves with the rope I'd provided? I saved every transaction, every digital footprint, every damning piece of evidence into a secure file. It was time for the execution. The story broke at 6:00 a.m. the next morning. It didn't start as a trickle, it was a deluge. I hadn't leaked the information to one friendly journalist. I'd given the entire beautifully documented package to every major news outlet in the country simultaneously. It was a declaration of war. The morning news exploded with revelations that sent shockwaves, not just through the political establishment, but through the financial world. It wasn't about a corrupt governor anymore. It was about the vast criminal conspiracy of the Chen family and their associates. Lily's face, pale and drawn, flickered across every television screen in the coffee shop where I sat, incognito in a hoodie and sunglasses. Reporters, armed with the undeniable proof I had provided, detailed her financial crimes with surgical, brutal precision. The coffee shop, which yesterday had been buzzing with gossip about my downfall, was now alight with conversations about the Chen family scandal. Strangers discussed my sister's blatant corruption like it was the plot of a hit television show. My phone, a clean burner I used for observation, began to vibrate incessantly. Panicked calls and texts from extended family members, distant cousins, and business partners, all waking up to find their own names and companies mentioned in the sprawling investigation documents I had released. The rot went deep, and I had just exposed the entire root system to the sterilizing light of day. Would they remember that every action has an equal and opposite reaction? Newton's third law wasn't just for physics, it was for justice, too. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Father's hands, usually so steady, shook as he gripped a glass of whiskey in his study, the amber liquid sloshing like his liquid fear. On the massive television screen mounted on his wall, news anchors were dissecting his business empire, live on air. The study that had once been his fortress now felt like a tomb, the shadows lengthening as his political connections, one by one, released statements distancing themselves from him like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Mother's call came first. Her voice, usually so controlled and imperious, cracked with a desperate, unfamiliar plea. Elena, what is happening? This is a misunderstanding. You have to fix this. Tell them it's not true. The same woman who had called me a disgrace just days ago was now sobbing into the phone, begging me to save the family name she accused me of tarnishing. Marcus was next. He didn't call. He appeared at the door of my temporary residence near midnight, his perfect hair disheveled, his eyes wild with a terror that stripped away his handsome facade, revealing the weak, craven man beneath. He offered everything. He offered to call off his engagement to Lily. He offered marriage. He offered me a cut of his fortune. He offered to confess to anything as long as I made it all go away. I was forced into it, Elena. Your father, he has dirt on everyone. I had no choice. Lily, true to form, just sent a stream of increasingly hysterical, abusive text messages, blaming me for ruining her life. They were panicking, they were broken, and this was only the beginning. Did they finally understand that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt? They had doused the bridge in gasoline themselves. I had simply lit the match. They were wounded, but not yet dead. And wounded animals are the most dangerous. Having failed to frame me financially, they pivoted to a more insidious form of warfare: character assassination. The campaign launched like a wildfire across social media and the darker corners of the internet. It was a symphony of slander, orchestrated by the one person who knew all my old secrets: David. Each fabricated story was more vicious than the last, painting me as everything from a dangerously unstable neurotic to a criminal mastermind who had framed her own family. Anonymous sources, whose digitally distorted voices I recognized with a chilling certainty, whispered lies to reporters hungry for the next chapter of the scandal. They spoke of my erratic behavior after my exile, my history of manipulation, my thirst for revenge. David weaponized every childhood embarrassment, every teenage mistake, every tearful confession I had ever shared with him. My bout with anxiety in college became proof of mental instability. A rebellious phase at 16 was twisted into early signs of sociopathy. My grief over my supposed death was painted as a calculated crocodile tear performance. The morning newspapers, reeking of fresh ink and old malice, splashed my face across their front pages with screaming headlines: Governor Chen, master manipulator or mentally unfit, and the Chen conspiracy, who is the real victim? They weren't just attacking my position anymore. They were trying to annihilate my very identity, to poison the public well so thoroughly that no one would ever believe me again. They were trying to erase the real Elena and replace her with a monster of their own creation. How many lies could they tell before truth became irrelevant? They operated on the principle that if you fling enough mud, some of it will stick. They were about to learn that I owned the mud factory. My response was silence. I retreated. I vanished from the public eye, canceled all my press conferences, and took a leave of absence for personal reflection. I allowed the narrative of the wounded, cracking leader to take hold. Photographers, camped outside my private residence, were rewarded with carefully staged glimpses of my broken figure behind the tinted windows of my car. A flash of a tear-streaked face. A glimpse of me slumped in the back seat, the very picture of defeat. The performance demanded precision. I scheduled private phone calls on unencrypted lines I knew were being monitored by the press, my voice cracking with desperation as I pleaded with my fictional therapist. My staff, loyal to me but unknowing of the larger game, played their parts perfectly. Their genuine concern was easily manipulated. They leaked worried statements to carefully selected journalists, speaking of my fragile emotional state and their fears that the pressure has become too much. My enemies rejoiced. They saw my withdrawal as a confession of guilt, my silence as surrender. They doubled down on their attacks, growing bolder and sloppier in their certainty that they had finally broken me. They were convinced they were kicking a woman who was already down. Would they mistake strategic withdrawal for genuine surrender? A predator never sees the trap when it's focused on the bait. While they flooded the internet with a tsunami of fabricated scandals, I was in my command center, systematically harvesting their own digital secrets like a farmer gathering a poisoned crop. Their second mistake was assuming I was only a financial expert. In my 3 years of exile, I had become a master of digital warfare. The centerpiece of my counterattack was David. During our meeting in the university library, when he had placed his phone on the table to record me, I had done something far more invasive. Using a zero-click exploit I had purchased on the dark web, I had gained the complete, persistent access to his entire digital life. His phone was my microphone, his laptop my eye. I watched him coordinate the smear campaign in real time. I read his emails to paid-for journalists, complete with bullet points of the lies they were to report. I saw his direct messages with Marcus and Lily, where they laughed about my meltdown and strategized their next attack. I harvested his browser history, his deleted files, his financial records showing the payments from my father's slush fund. The irony sparkled like a diamond in the darkness. They had documented their own conspiracy with the very same technology they were using to try and destroy me. They wrote their own indictments in chat logs and email threads, creating an irrefutable, time-stamped record of their crimes. I compiled it all: audio recordings of their strategy meetings from David's phone, screenshots of their conversations, bank records of their payments to slander-for-hire websites and unethical reporters. How completely would they convict themselves with their own evidence? All I had to do was press send. The evidence dump was not a leak. It was a global event. I didn't give it to the mainstream media this time. I gave it to the world. At 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, a website called The Chen Truth went live. It contained everything. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. The digital tsunami of documented truth washed away their carefully constructed mountain of lies in a single, devastating wave. There were the recordings of David's calls, his voice clear as he instructed a blogger to push the mental instability angle hard. There were the screenshots of Lily's texts. Can't believe people are buying this. She's probably laughing at us. There were the financial records, a clear and undeniable trail of money from my father to a network of digital mercenaries. Social media platforms, which had been a cesspool of lies about me, reversed course with breathtaking speed. Hashtag Chen Truth and Justice for Elena trended globally. The public, presented with irrefutable proof, turned on my accusers with a righteous fury that dwarfed any of the manufactured outrage against me. The journalists and bloggers David had paid were exposed and disgraced, their careers ending in a matter of hours. Public opinion, which they had tried to steer like a massive ship, swung around and crushed their little fleet of lies. The narrative wasn't just reset, it was rewritten in stone. Would they drown in the same waters they'd tried to drag me under? The tide had turned, and the undertow was pulling them down into the abyss. The panic this time was a different flavor. It was not the fear of financial ruin, but the terror of total public annihilation. Their names, their faces, their private words were everywhere, objects of scorn and ridicule. Their carefully curated images were shattered into a million pieces. Lily's breakdown was public and spectacular. She appeared outside my office building, her designer composure cracked like a broken mirror. She screamed at the assembled reporters, a torrent of accusations and apologies, all jumbled together in the same hysterical breath. It made for incredible television. Mother, upon discovering that her own private, disparaging conversations about her disappointing children had been part of the data dump, went on a rage-fueled rampage through her prize-winning rose garden. The trampled scarlet petals were a fitting metaphor for her own ruined reputation. And David, poor, foolish David. He understood finally what I had done. He knew his digital life had been laid bare. He sent a flood of desperate, unhinged emails, each one more pathetic than the last. They started with threats, devolved into pleas, and ended with groveling apologies, begging for a mercy he had never once shown me. I had to, Elena. They would have ruined me. Please, you know me. This isn't who I am. Oh, but it was. It was exactly who he was. And the entire world knew it now. Did they finally taste the bitter fruit they'd planted in others' lives? It was a harvest of shame, and it was bountiful. They had lost the war for my money and the war for my reputation. All they had left was brute force. The escalation was as predictable as it was terrifying. Desperation had driven them to cross a line they had never dared approach before. They were no longer just family betrayers, they were potential killers. I discovered it on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon. A gut feeling, a prickle of unease, honed by years of hypervigilance, made me deviate from my routine. Instead of getting directly into my official vehicle in the secure underground parking garage, I told my driver to wait and performed a quick visual inspection. My past life hadn't taught me about car mechanics, but my reborn one had insisted on lessons in survival. There it was, a small, dark puddle spreading on the concrete beneath the driver's side front wheel. The acrid, oily smell of brake fluid hit my nostrils. I knelt down, my heart a cold, steady drum in my chest. The brake lines hadn't rusted or failed. They had been severed with surgical precision. A clean, deliberate cut. The cavernous parking garage was silent, but the echo of my footsteps as I backed away, pulling out my phone to document the evidence, was deafening. Each photograph of the cut line, of the spreading fluid, was a snapshot of their final pathetic evolution. They had exhausted their repertoire of lies and manipulations and had resorted to the crudest tool of all, murder. My security detail, alerted by a silent tap on my watch, swarmed the area within minutes. They were professionals, their faces grim but unsurprised. They had been preparing for this possibility. I, however, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool concrete. They had tried to destroy my career, my name, and my sanity. Now they were trying to destroy my body. How far would they fall before they realized there was no bottom to their pit of depravity? They were about to discover it led directly to a federal prison cell. The call came from Marcus that evening. His voice was strained, frantic. "Elena, we have to meet. Just you and me. No security. It's about Lily and your father. They're out of control. I'm scared of what they'll do next. I can help you. I can give you everything you need to stop them for good." He suggested our old romantic spot, a cliff overlooking the harbor where he had first told me he loved me. The place where, in my past life, he had revealed his true allegiance to my family's enemies in a devastating confession. The poetry of it was almost too perfect. He wanted to end things where they began. The salt-laced air carried whispers of violence as I approached the lookout point alone, just as he'd asked. The setting sun painted the sky and the water in streaks of blood red and bruised purple, an appropriate backdrop for his final performance. I saw him standing near the edge, his silhouette stark against the dying light. But I saw more than that. My pre-scout team had already been here. I knew that nestled among the rocks below, out of his line of sight, were two of his associates. Hired muscle, not family friends. Their presence confirmed what I already suspected. This wasn't a reconciliation, it was an ambush. The plan was simple and brutal. Get me to the cliff edge and a tragic accident would solve all their problems. The unstable, disgraced governor, tormented by her family's scandals, takes her own life. It was a neat, tidy ending. His hands trembled as he opened a bottle of wine, the neck of the bottle clinking against the crystal glasses like a funeral bell. "I'm so sorry, Elena," he began, his voice thick with fake emotion. Would he remember that I'd always been afraid of heights, or had he forgotten everything about the woman he'd betrayed? It didn't matter. The woman he was talking to now wasn't afraid of anything. I played my role with a precision that would have earned me an Academy Award. I allowed fear to color my voice. I let my body tremble. I confessed imaginary weaknesses and revealed fictional vulnerabilities, painting a portrait of a woman who was broken, defeated, and at the end of her rope. "I can't do this anymore, Marcus," I whispered, my voice carrying just far enough for the hidden recording equipment I knew he'd have planted. "They've won. The brake line. I know it was them. They're going to kill me." My hands, shaking with practiced terror, gripped his arm. "You have to help me," I begged, tears welling in my eyes. "Help me disappear. I'll sign anything. I'll give up the governorship. I just want to live." I became everything they believed me to be. Weak, desperate, and utterly dependent on their mercy. I let him lead me closer to the edge of the cliff, the wind whipping my hair around my face. He put a comforting arm around me, his grip like iron. "It's okay," he soothed, his voice a venomous whisper in my ear. "Everything's going to be okay now. I'll take care of you." He looked into my eyes, searching for the foolish girl he had destroyed once before. He saw her there, reflected in my tear-filled gaze. He saw his victory. Did they see a broken woman, or were they staring at their own reflection in the mirror of their doom? Just as his grip tightened, just as he was preparing to make his final move, the night erupted. Not with a scream, but with the flood of a dozen high-intensity spotlights. The roar of engines filled the air as three black SUVs, which had been hidden on the access road, screeched to a halt, boxing us in. FBI, nobody move! The voice, amplified by a bullhorn, cracked through the night like thunder. Marcus froze, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His associates in the rocks below found themselves staring down the barrels of assault rifles held by agents who had rappelled down the cliff face. I stepped away from Marcus, my fear vanishing as if it were a cloak I'd just shrugged off. I reached into my blazer and pulled out a small, flat device. It wasn't a weapon. It was the receiver for the wire I'd been wearing for months. Every word, Marcus, I said, my voice cold and clear. Every threat, every conspiracy, the financial fraud, the smear campaign, the attempted murder of a state official. For months, I had been cooperating with a federal task force. My leave of absence hadn't been about hiding. It had been about building an airtight case. They hadn't been trying to destroy a lone, broken woman. They had been conspiring against a governor who had the full weight and resources of the federal government as her silent partner. How many federal crimes had they committed while trying to destroy one woman? Racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, domestic terrorism. The list was long, and the sentences would be longer. The arrests were a thing of beauty, a coordinated multi-state takedown that played out on live television. While Marcus was being forced to his knees on the cliffside, his perfect hair disheveled as reporters who had been tipped off by the FBI shouted questions, another team was ramming down the door of my father's study. A third was arresting Lily in the middle of a frantic call to her lawyer. Lily's perp walk became an internet sensation. The image of her in a couture outfit, her face a mess of tears and rage, being guided into the back of a federal vehicle, was a stark, satisfying contrast to the orange jumpsuit that was waiting for her. The federal indictments were unsealed the next morning, and they read like the script of a crime thriller. The charges were staggering in their scope, detailing a criminal enterprise that went back years. The attempted murder was just the explosive finale to a long and sordid story of corruption. Would they find federal prison as accommodating as the luxury they'd always known? I sincerely doubted it. The courtroom reeked of desperation and expensive cologne turning sour with fear. One by one, faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, their own words, their own financial records, their own recorded conspiracies, they crumbled. They took plea deals that would save them from the death penalty for the attempted assassination of a governor, but would guarantee they would spend the rest of their natural lives behind bars. Father's empire imploded. His business associates, facing their own investigations for complicity, fled his toxic brand faster than Olympic sprinters. The Chen name was no longer a symbol of power, but of disgrace. Mother aged 10 years and 10 days. The society pages now chronicled her downfall, her face gaunt with the public realization that her golden children, her legacy, would die in prison. Their letters started arriving daily at my office, sent from their respective federal penitentiaries. They were pathetic, rambling missives filled with self-pity and last-ditch pleas. They offered religious conversions. They offered to donate their remaining frozen assets to my charities. They offered their undying loyalty. Marcus, in a particularly desperate scrawl, even offered me one of his kidneys, should I ever need it. Did they understand that some betrayals purchase tickets to hell that have no return policy? They were about to receive their final confirmation. The final act of my revenge was not delivered in a courtroom or a press conference, but in the quiet, sterile office of a private investigator I had hired a year ago. The report he slid across his desk landed with a soft, heavy thud, a bomb disguised as paperwork. It revealed a truth I had long suspected but had never been able to confirm in my past life. My trust fund, the one my father had claimed, was emptied to cover my embezzlement debts. The one that had supposedly been drained by family financial troubles was not empty. It contained, after years of accrued interest and shrewd investments made in my name, over $2 billion. My family hadn't just framed me. They had been systematically stealing from me my entire life. They had constructed a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts, all legally in my name as the sole beneficiary, to hide my own inheritance from me. Every financial crisis they had suffered was a manufactured lie, a performance designed to justify another withdrawal from the Bank of Elena. Every plea for money had been a calculated theft from the fortune my maternal grandmother, a savvy investor in her own right, had left solely to me. The report detailed it all: the museum quality art hanging in father's study, the family heirlooms supposedly sold to pay debts, were cheap, high quality reproductions. The originals, a collection of impressionist masterpieces worth hundreds of millions, were sitting in a climate controlled vault in Geneva, part of a private collection held by a corporation bearing my name. How long had they been stealing from the very source they'd claimed was bankrupt? Since the day I was born. My entire life had been their long con. The second bomb dropped in a marble conference room at the most prestigious corporate law firm in the state. My lawyers, a new team loyal only to me and the $2 billion in my account, had been working for months. They had followed the trail of ownership documents, a paper trail my father had foolishly preserved, believing his legal firewalls were impenetrable. The lead attorney, a woman with eyes as sharp as cut diamonds, began to read from a summary document. The truth was more staggering than I could have imagined. I was not just the heir to the Chen fortune. I was, and had been for years, the majority shareholder in every single company they had used to betray me. Lily's startup, the hollow shell she had used to frame me for embezzlement? It was technically my subsidiary, funded entirely by illegal transfers from my own trust. Marcus's successful consulting firm had been launched using seed money from a venture capital fund I unknowingly owned. David's media company was a subsidiary of a larger communications conglomerate where I held a 60% stake. Even Mother's beloved charitable foundation, the source of her social standing, was primarily funded by an endowment that was legally mine. They hadn't just stabbed me in the back. They had been my employees while they did it. They had been living in my house, driving my cars, and using my money to plot my destruction. The irony was so perfect, so complete, it felt as though it had been scripted by a vengeful god. What would they say when they discovered they'd been my employees while stabbing me in the back? Unfortunately for them, they would have to discover it from a prison cell. The governor's mansion felt different now. As I walked the halls, I finally understood its true significance. It wasn't just a political prize I had won through grit and merit. It was a position I had, in a sense, inherited. My grandmother, the same one who had left me her fortune, had not just been a savvy investor. She had been a political powerhouse, a behind-the-scenes kingmaker who had built a dynasty of public service. A dynasty my father and mother had systematically erased from our family history, wanting no power in the family that wasn't their own. They had diminished my sense of belonging, making me feel like an outsider in my own bloodline. The stern-faced portraits lining the hallway were not strangers. They were my ancestors. Uncles, great-aunts, my grandmother's own father. A lineage of judges, senators, and public servants. Their eyes held the secrets of the power structures and loyal networks I had never known I commanded. My lucky appointment to a key commission years ago, the one that had launched my political career, hadn't been luck. It had been the quiet work of my grandmother's old allies, men and women who saw her spirit in me and had been waiting for me to claim my birthright. How many doors would open when I finally turned the keys I'd always possessed? I was about to find out. The Chen name wasn't a disgrace. It was a legacy, and I was its rightful heir. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. All those years they had called me naive, trusting, and foolish I had been building. Not with their tainted money, but with my own abilities. In my first life, I had been that girl, but in this life, I knew better. Every apparent mistake had been a calculated move. Every seemingly random friendship was a strategic alliance. My allies, the ones who had helped me execute my plan, hadn't come to me after I became governor. They were a shadow network I had cultivated for years, people who had watched my family's betrayal with growing disgust and had recognized my potential. Sarah, the brilliant attorney who helped expose the conspiracy. Ben, the ex-military security expert who taught me about survival. They were not new friends. They were my real family, forged in the fires of a shared purpose. My election as governor wasn't a fluke. It was the result of a quiet, multi-year campaign orchestrated by people who valued competence over connections and who recognized my worth when my own family could not. The evidence of their crimes hadn't been accidentally discovered. It had been carefully, patiently harvested over 3 years of meticulous investigation, funded by the secret smaller trust I had managed to establish before my exile. I hadn't just been reborn, I had been reborn as a chess master. Did they realize they'd been fighting a chess master while playing a child's game of checkers? Their underestimation of me was, in the end, their most complete and fatal error. The boardroom where they had once held a solemn meeting to vote to strip me of my family privileges now hosted a different kind of vote. It was a series of emergency shareholder meetings conducted by proxy, orchestrated by my new legal team. One by one, control of every Chen family asset was legally transferred to its rightful majority shareholder, me. Their attempts to steal my inheritance had created a flawless, documented paper trail of systematic fraud. It was all the evidence my lawyers needed to make the asset recovery process brutally swift and straightforward. The same high-priced law firms that had helped them hide my money now worked overtime with the fear of federal prosecution, ensuring their sudden and fervent cooperation to restore everything they had stolen. Their greatest success, the complete and total consolidation of all their assets under a corporate structure they thought they controlled, had become their most complete failure. They had gift-wrapped their entire empire and handed it to me. Would they appreciate the irony that their greatest success had become their most complete failure? I sent them each a single formal letter in prison, informing them of the change of ownership of all their former assets. I imagined them reading it under the dim light of their cells. The prison visiting room smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. I met with each of them one last time, face to face, through a thick pane of glass. Their orange jumpsuits were a stark, fitting contrast to the designer clothing they had worn while they orchestrated the destruction of my life. Lily went first. Her tears were real this time, hot and desperate, streaming down her pale face. She begged for a sister's forgiveness, promising she would spend her life making amends, that she had been brainwashed by our parents. Father was next. His proud, arrogant bearing had crumbled into the stooped posture of a defeated old man. His voice cracked as he pleaded, not for forgiveness, but for a modicum of comfort in his old age, offering to sign over assets he no longer controlled. Marcus, still handsome despite the prison pallor, didn't cry. He tried to use his old charm, his voice a low, intimate whisper through the speaker grill. He spoke of genuine love, of a terrible mistake, of a second chance that might have moved me 3 years in a lifetime ago. Did they expect mercy from someone they'd tried to murder? To each of them, to their tears, their pleas, and their pathetic promises, I offered the exact same response. I looked them directly in the eye, my face calm and unreadable. I offered them a small, serene smile, and I spoke 2 words, the final 2 words they would ever hear from me. No, never. The simplicity of my refusal, the finality of it, seemed to devastate them more than any elaborate, hate-filled speech could have. It was not a judgment passed in anger. It was a fact, as cold and immutable as the steel doors that would shut behind them. Would they understand that some betrayals purchase permanent exile from grace? As I walked away, leaving them to the silence and their life sentences, I knew the answer. They would have the rest of their lives to think about it. My private terrace overlooked an endless, breathing expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Waves rolled toward the shore with the same inevitable, rhythmic certainty that had brought justice to my enemies. The morning air, cool and clean, tasted of salt and freedom. Each breath filled lungs that had, for years, forgotten how to inhale without the accompanying tightness of fear. Steam rose in a delicate plume from my favorite mug, a simple, heavy ceramic piece, not the fragile crystal my family had insisted was the mark of status. I watched the seabirds dance on the wind, their calls sharp and joyful as the rising sun scattered a carpet of diamonds across the water. For the first time in what felt like 2 lifetimes, I watched the dawn break without the cold calculus of which enemy might strike during the daylight hours. My war was over. I had won. What did peace feel like when revenge was finally complete? It felt quiet. It felt warm. It felt like my own skin, finally comfortable to live in. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Chen Foundation for Justice took place on the steps of the same courthouse where my betrayers had been sentenced. The symbolism was deliberate, a public declaration that the tables had not just turned, but had been dismantled and rebuilt into something new. As the foundation, funded by a significant portion of my reclaimed fortune, had a single clear mission. Young, idealistic lawyers from underprivileged backgrounds would receive full scholarships and stipends to work on cases fighting corporate and governmental corruption. We would fund investigative journalism, protect whistleblowers, and ensure that the next Chen would have the tools and allies I had been forced to forge for myself, all alone in the dark. Carved in the cool marble above the grand entrance was the Foundation's motto, my personal creed, a promise to the world: truth always emerges. How many future victims would be saved by the weapons forged in my destruction? The number was impossible to know, but the effort itself was the point. My pain would not be meaningless. It would be a shield for others. The dinner table in my modest apartment, chosen for its warm evening light and proximity to the park, not for its status, hosted a sound I had rarely heard in my childhood: genuine, uninhibited laughter. Sarah, the razor-sharp attorney who had helped me dismantle my family's empire, argued playfully with Ben, my stoic head of security, over who had the better recipe for lasagna. Her 2 young children, who called me Aunt Elena, were showing me a drawing they'd made, a colorful, chaotic masterpiece of our family, including a stick figure of me with a superhero cape. These people, bound to me by loyalty and shared ideals rather than by blood and betrayal, were my true family. The love between us was not an obligation or a transaction. It was something we had built together, brick by brick, on a foundation of trust. Why had I spent so long mourning the family I'd lost instead of building the one I deserved? It was a lesson learned late, but learned well. The gubernatorial office felt different now. I occupied it by right, not in spite of opposition. My decisions were no longer guided by the desperate calculus of survival, but by the quiet, steady principles of justice. The anti-corruption legislation I championed, a sweeping set of laws that bore my name, passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. It would protect future public servants from the kinds of financial and personal attacks that had nearly destroyed me, creating new legal frameworks that made conspiracy more difficult and whistleblowing safer. International delegations began to visit our state, not for our commerce, but to study our new transparency initiatives. My personal, painful victory had inadvertently become a potential blueprint for systemic change, a small beacon of hope in a cynical world. Could one woman's survival become a blueprint for systemic change? I had a responsibility to try. The mountain trail stretched ahead of me, a rugged, upward promise of adventures uncomplicated by political intrigue or family drama. Each step on the dusty path carried me further from the woman who had once lived in constant fear of tomorrow. My backpack contained only the essentials: water, a map, a first aid kit, and a lightweight tent. There were no designer labels, no status symbols, just practical gear for exploring a landscape that cared nothing for human politics. The altitude made breathing a conscious effort, a clean, honest struggle that felt more real than any suffocating atmosphere in a courtroom or a boardroom. At the summit, as the wind tried to tear the breath from my lungs, I looked out over a sea of clouds and felt a profound sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with wealth or power. I pulled a small, weatherproof flag from my pack and planted it in the rocky soil. It read simply, "Elena was here." What did victory look like when you finally stopped running from defeat? It looked like a mountain peak, clear and cold and beautiful, and the strength to have climbed it yourself. From the balcony of the penthouse I had purchased, not inherited, but earned with the salary from my political career and sound investments, I watched the sunset paint the city gold. The skyline glittered with millions of lights, each one representing a life, a story, a person I had sworn an oath to protect. That oath now felt less like a burden and more like a privilege. Power, I had learned, was not for punishment. It was for service. In the distance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, a reminder that the world would always have its tempests. But I no longer feared the lightning. I knew how to build a shelter. I knew how to stand in the rain. Would I choose this difficult path again? Knowing the cost of victory? Knowing the woman it had forged me into? Without hesitation. My reflection in the bedroom mirror showed a woman I finally recognized. The scars, both visible and invisible, were there, but they were woven into a tapestry of strength and wisdom. Her eyes were clear, her smile was genuine, without calculation or performance. On my nightstand, a photograph of my chosen family at last year's Christmas dinner, their faces bright with a joy that could never be purchased or faked. Sleep came easily now. There were no dreams of revenge, no nightmares of betrayal. There was only the deep, profound rest of a traveler who had finally, after a very long and arduous journey, come home to herself. In the quiet darkness of my room, I whispered a prayer of gratitude. Not for the enemies I had defeated, but for the strength I had discovered in surviving them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new mountains to climb. But I would face them as Elena, whole, free. The final question wasn't whether I'd won. It was whether winning had made me into someone worth becoming. The answer, like the first hint of morning light already gathering on the horizon, was a beautiful, peaceful, and undeniable yes.